I stood at the kitchen table holding a photograph of my wife Ellen hugging my brother Neil. Her laughter in that picture cut me like a knife. 30 years of marriage and this is what I got. But when I told her, I knew she just shrugged. You shouldn't care. I smiled, handed her the envelope and left her scream as she opened it. Still echoes in my ears. This was only the beginning. I was going to get justice for myself and no one was going to stop me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I sat at a corner table in the dimly lit restaurant, the clink of glasses and murmured conversation swirling around me like a fog. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the neon glow of Portland's downtown. My fingers tapped the stem of a wine glass. The wait for Ellen stretching longer than her usual tardiness. 30 years of marriage and I still gave her the benefit of the doubt, foolish maybe. Then I saw them across the room in a booth tucked under a flickering sconce. Ellen leaned toward Neil. Her hand rested on his arm, her laugh sharp and bright, slicing through the hum of the restaurant. My brother, with his slick grin and tailored jacket, tilted his head closer, whispering something that made her eyes spark. I froze. The wine glass trembled in my grip, a drop spilling onto the white tablecloth, spreading like blood. I'd come here to surprise her, to salvage a night after another late shift at the office. Instead, I was the one surprised. My chest tightened each breath, a struggle against the weight of what I saw. Were they just catching up? Neil had always been the charming one, the brother I'd bailed out of debt, the one I trusted. But Ellen's fingers lingered too long, her smile too intimate, frank. Her voice cut through my haze. She'd seen me, her face shifting from delight to something harder, like a mask snapping into place. Neil leaned back, adjusting his watch. A flashy thing I'd never afford Ellen. I said, my voice steady, despite the storm inside. Didn't expect to see you here. She slid out of the booth, smoothing her dress. Oh, it's just Neil. You know, catching up. Her tone was light, but her eyes darted to the side, a tale I'd ignored for years. Catching up, I echoed, my gaze flicking to Neil. He flashed a smile, all teeth and no warmth. Good to see you, Frank Ben. A while I nodded, words stuck in my throat. The restaurant felt smaller, the air thick, with the scent of garlic and betrayal. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. I'll let you get back to it, Frank. Wait. Ellen started, but I was already moving. The wine glass abandoned its stain, a silent accusation. Rain hit my face as I pushed through the door, the cold biting through my thin jacket. My watch caught my eye, stopped, the hands frozen at 7:43. Time itself seemed to mock me in my car. The engine hummed, but I didn't drive. Rain pelted the windshield each drop. A question, how long had this been going on? Had I been blind? Or had they been that good at hiding it? My hand brushed an old envelope on the passenger seat, a gift from Ellen years ago, a love note tucked inside. Now it felt like a relic from a life that no longer existed. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I'd built everything for her, our home, our life. And Neil, the brother I'd carried through his failures, sat there with her laughing. The image burned, but doubt nodded at me. Was it just a moment or something more I needed to know? I needed to remember who we were before this. The rain hadn't stopped hammering the roof of our house in Portland's quiet suburbs. I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from a flickering lamp that Ellen always hated. A photo album lay open on my lap, its pages heavy with memories. I wasn't sure I wanted any more. The restaurant scene replayed in my mind, Ellen's laugh, Neil's smirk, the wine staining the tablecloth. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. I flipped a page there. We were younger, standing outside our first home, a cramped bungalow. We'd painted ourselves. Ellen wore my old flannel, grinning as paint speckled her cheeks. I'd worked double shifts to afford that place, coming home to her laughter, her warmth. When had that changed? When had? Her smiles turned sharp. Her words clipped another photo, our wedding, her veil catching the breeze. I promised her everything, and I tried nights at the office crunching numbers to buy her the diamond earrings she wanted, the bigger house she deserved. She'd thank me, her arms around my neck, but over time those moments faded. "This life's so small, Frank," she'd said once, staring out our new bay window. I thought she meant the view. I turned another page and a letter slipped out, its edges yellowed her handwriting. One so familiar stared back. "Frank, you're my hero always." The word stung, a cruel contrast to the woman who dismissed me tonight. I crumpled the paper, its faint perfume, her perfume clinging to my fingers. It hit the trash can with a soft thud. The house was too quiet. The ticking of the wall clock the only sound. I'd sacrificed dreams for her trips to the coast, a boat I'd sketched in my head for what? To watch her lean into Neil, to feel like a stranger in my own life. I trusted him too. Paid for his college when he flunked out, lent him money when his sure-thing deals fell through. He'd always been the charmer, the one who got away with everything, not this time. I stood pacing the room. The album lay open. A frozen past mocking the present. Ellen's coldness had grown over years. Her complaints sharper, her eyes always searching for something more. I thought it was my fault that I wasn't enough. Now I wondered if it was her or him. The rain slowed to drizzle now, but my thoughts raced. I couldn't keep doubting, couldn't let this eat me alive. I needed answers, not memories. The letter in the trash felt like a line drawn between who I was and who I needed to be. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through contacts. There was a name I hadn't called in years, someone who could dig up the truth. My thumb hovered over the screen, the clocks ticking louder in my ears. Morning light filtered through the blinds of my office, a cramped space in downtown Portland where I'd spent decades balancing books and dreams. Rain tapped the window, a steady rhythm to my racing thoughts. The restaurant, Ellen's hand on Neil's arm, the stopped watch. It all churned in my head. I couldn't unsee it, couldn't unknow the doubt. My desk was cluttered with ledgers, but today numbers meant nothing. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a name I hadn't used in years, Joe Callahan, a private detective I had met during a fraud case at work. Gruff chain, smoking but sharp. My thumb hesitated. Calling him meant crossing a line, admitting I didn't trust my wife, my brother. But staying in the dark was worse. I hit dial Callahan. A growly voice answered, cutting through the static. "Joe, it's Frank Russell. I need your help." My voice was steady, but my pulse wasn't. "Frank, been a while." "What's up?" His tone was casual, but I heard the creak of a chair, the shift to attention. "I need you to look into someone discreetly." I swallowed the words. "Heavy, my wife, Ellen." A pause, then a low whistle. "All right, meet me at the diner on 5th in an hour. Bring whatever you've got." I hung up my hand, shaking. From my wallet I pulled a photo of Ellen smiling years ago before her warmth turned to ice. I stared at it, then slid it into an envelope, the same one from the car last night. It felt heavier. Now a weight of intent. The diner smelled of coffee and grease, its windows fogged from the rain. Joe sat in a corner booth, his coat damp, a cigarette stubbed out in an ashtray. He nodded as I slid in across from him, his eyes scanning me like I was evidence. "Spill it, Frank," he said, sipping black coffee. "What's she done?" I pushed the envelope across the table. I saw her with my brother Neil. Too close. I need to know what's going on. Joe opened the envelope, glancing at the photo. "This her?" I nodded. He tucked it away. "Won't be cheap, but I'll find what's there." "Anything else I should know?" "They're clever," I said, my voice low. "Neil's always been slippery, and Ellen, she's not who she was." Joe grunted, jotting a note. "Give me a week, I'll dig up what they're hiding." He stood tossing a few bills on the table. "Stay calm, Frank. Don't tip them off." Back in my office, I locked the envelope in my desk drawer. Its presence a quiet promise. The rain outside hadn't let up. Mirroring the storm in my chest, I glanced at my watch, still stopped. A reminder of the moment everything shifted. What would Joe find? A fling, something worse? The truth felt like a blade, sharp and close, but I couldn't stop. Now, in my car, the engine idling, I stared at the city blurred by rain. A week, Joe had said, see 7 days until the truth came knocking. I gripped the wheel wondering if I was ready for what it might bring. Rain sleed down the windshield as I pulled up to the squat brick building in Portland's old town, the kind of place that smelled of damp paper and bad decisions. Joe Callahan's office was on the second floor, up a staircase that creaked like it held grudges. My coat was soaked by the time I reached his door. The weight of the last week, heavier than the weather. I'd hired Joe to dig into Ellen and Neil, and now, with his call this morning, I braced for answers I wasn't sure I wanted. Inside the office was a mess. Piles of files teetered on a desk, a coffee pot hissed in the corner, and a single bulb cast shadows over Joe's withered face. He leaned back in his chair boots, propped on a crate, and slid a thin folder across the desk. Here's what I've got so far, Frank. I opened it, my hand steady, despite the churn in my gut, pages of type, notes, timestamps, locations. Ellen and Neil had met 3 times this week, twice at a cafe near his apartment, once at a hotel downtown. My jaw tightened as I read the words blurring, a cafe, a hotel, places I'd never been invited to. Photos are in the back. Joe said, his voice rough but not unkind. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling. Like my thoughts, I flipped to the images, grainy but clear enough. Ellen's hand on Neil's arm. Her head tilted in laughter, Neil smirking, his watch, glinting under the cafe's lights. My brother, who I pulled out of debt more times than I could count. Sitting too close to my wife, I shut the folder, my fingers pressing hard against the edge. This is it? My voice was low, but it carried the anger I'd kept leashed. Joe shrugged, exhaling smoke. It's a start. They're careful, but not careful enough. I can keep digging, but he paused, tapping ash into a tray. There's something else, not in the report, yet Neil's got. Dealings that don't add up might be bigger than an affair, bigger how? I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. He waved a hand. Give me a few days, it's murky, but it could be trouble. His eyes met mine steady. You sure you want the whole picture? I nodded, though my throat tightened. Everything, no matter what. Joe grunted, jotting a note. All right, I'll call when I've got more. He stood, signaling the meeting was over. I tucked the folder into an old envelope, the same one from the car, now a vessel for my unraveling life, and left the rain colder against my skin. Back home, the house was dark. Ellen out somewhere she hadn't bothered to mention. I sat at the kitchen table. The envelope in front of me, its contents, a quiet indictment. The clock on the wall ticked each second, a reminder of time slipping away. I'd paid for Neil's apartment, his second chances, and this was my reward. Ellen's laughter in those photos cut deeper than her lies, but Joe's hint about Neil's dealings lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. What else were they hiding? I needed to know, and soon the rain had turned to a drizzle. By the time I reached Joe's office again, 3 days after our last meeting, Portland streets glistened under gray skies, the city. As restless as I was, my hands gripped the steering wheel, the envelope from last time now heavier with what I'd read. Ellen and Neil meeting in secret, laughing like I didn't exist. Joe's call this morning had been brief. Got something you need to see. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I parked and climbed the familiar, creaky stairs. Joe's office hadn't changed. Same clutter, same stale coffee smell, same dim light that made everything feel like a confession. He didn't waste time pushing a new folder toward me. As I, Saturday, take a look, he said, his voice gruff, a cigarette already burning between his fingers. I opened it and the first photo hit like a punch. Ellen and Neil in his car, her hand on his, their faces close, caught in a moment that wasn't meant for me. Another shot them outside a hotel, Neil's arm around her waist. My chest went cold, each image carving away the last of my doubts. 30 years of marriage reduced to grainy proof of betrayal. There's more, Joe said, watching me. Neil's not just playing your wife, he's got something else going on, something that could burn him bad. I looked up, my fingers still on the photos. What is it? Joe leaned back, exhaling smoke. Not sure, yet looks like he's mixed up in some shady deals. Money moving where it shouldn't. I'm close, but it's tricky if I'm right. This could ruin him. He paused, his eyes narrowing. You want me to keep pushing? Yes, I said, my voice flat but firm. I need it all. He nodded, scribbling something on a pad. All right, but this kind of dirt, it's not just personal, could be dangerous. He slid the photos back into the folder. You're holding dynamite, Frank. I tucked the photos into the envelope, its edges worn from handling. My hands trembled, not from fear but from a rage I hadn't let myself feel until now. Ellen's smile in those pictures wasn't the one I'd loved. It was calculated, cruel, and Neil, who'd mocked my boring job while I bailed him out, had crossed a line I couldn't forgive. I left Joe's office, the rain picking up again, drumming on my hood as I drove home. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, a silent partner. And whatever came next at home, I spread the photos on the kitchen table, each one a wound, but also a weapon. Joe's warning about Neil's deals echoed. What was he hiding? Something worse than an affair. I poured a coffee, untouched, and stared at the images. The clock ticked steady as my mind turned. I wouldn't confront them, not yet. I needed to plan something sharp enough to cut through their lies. Rain streaked the windshield of my parked car, the street lights casting fractured reflections across the glass. I sat in the quiet of Portland suburbs, a block from home, the envelope with Joe's photos on the seat beside me. The images burned in my mind, Ellen's hand in Neil's, their shared laughter. A betrayal sharper than any knife. But Joe's warning about Neil's deals had shifted something in me. This wasn't just about an affair. There was more, and I'd find it. I pulled a notepad from the glove box, my pen scratching quick, deliberate notes. Photos, proof timing. A scandal would be easy. Storm and shout. Watch them squirm. But that was weak, fleeting. I wanted justice, not chaos. Something that would hit them where it hurt, something they couldn't dodge. My breath fogged the air. The car's heater long since dead. The clock on the dashboard read 11:17 p.m. Each tick a reminder that time was mine to wield. I flipped through the photos again, my fingers cold. Ellen's smile, once my anchor, now mocked me. Neil's smug grin, the same one he'd worn when he borrowed money he never repaid, fueled my resolve. They thought I was predictable, a dull accountant they could outsmart. They were wrong. The envelope felt heavier, its contents a map to their downfall. I scribbled another note. Anniversary. Our 30th was weeks away, a date Ellen had already planned to celebrate with a dinner at home. She'd invited Neil. Of course, her family excuse, thin as the rain outside. That dinner could be my stage, a moment to turn their lies against them. But how? The photos were a start, but Joe's hint at Neil's secrets promised something bigger. I needed that piece, something undeniable. I tucked the envelope into the glove box. Its presence, a quiet vow. My mind raced, piecing together fragments. Neil's greed, Ellen's cold ambition. They built this betrayal together. I'd been their fool, but no longer. The plan forming in my head was risky. A tightrope over a chasm, but I'd walk it, I had to. The rain eased, leaving only drips on the windshield. I started the car. The engines hummed, steadying my pulse as I pulled into our driveway. The house loomed dark. Ellen asleep or out. The clock in the hall would be ticking. When I walked in, counting down to the anniversary, I'd use every second, every scrap of proof, to build something they couldn't escape. My hand rested on the glove box, the envelope inside, a promise of what was coming. The dining room glowed with candle light, the table set with china we hadn't used in years. Rain pattered against the windows of our Portland home. A soft drum beat to the tension coiling in my chest. I adjusted my tie, the mirror reflecting a man I barely recognized, gray hair, steady eyes, a stranger to the fool who trusted Ellen for 30 years. Tonight was our anniversary, a milestone she'd insisted on celebrating, and I played along knowing this was my stage. Ellen swept in her burgundy dress, clinging to her like a second skin, her smile as polished as the silverware. "Everything looks perfect, Frank," she said, her voice honeyed, but her eyes flicked to the door. Neil was coming, of course, her family excuse. As thin as the mist outside. I nodded my face, a mask, and poured the wine, watching her every move. The clock on the mantel ticked. Each second a countdown. I'd spent weeks building my plan, the envelope of evidence hidden in my office. But tonight wasn't for confrontation. Not yet. I needed to see how far she'd go. We sat, the air thick with her perfume and my suspicion. She raised her glass, her bracelet glinting to us. She said, her tone of performance, 30 years of love, 30 years. I echoed, my voice low, my eyes locked on hers. Her hand trembled just for a moment as she set her glass down. Then I saw it, her other hand slipping to her lap, clutching something small, powdery. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral, sipping my water instead of the wine. She turned to adjust a napkin, and in that split second her fingers moved over my glass, a faint dust falling into the red. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. Poison, a sedative? I didn't know, but the betrayal burned hotter than ever. She thought me blind, a pawn in her game with Neil. I smiled, sliding the glass aside untouched. "Not thirsty tonight," I said, my tone light, but her eyes widened, a crack in her facade. "Dessert?" she asked too quickly, standing to fetch a tray. Her hand shook as she sliced the cake, the knife catching the light like a warning. I leaned back, the clocks ticking louder in my ears. She was unraveling, and I hadn't even shown my hand. The rain outside grew heavier, a curtain. Between this moment and the truth I'd soon unveil. Dinner dragged, her small talk a desperate shield. I answered sparingly, my mind on the envelope, the photos, the reports. What had she planned with that powder? Was Neil part of it? I needed more, and I'd get it. As she cleared the plates, I stood brushing past her to the hall. The clock struck 10. Its chime a signal. I glanced back, her silhouette framed by candle light, and thought of the evidence waiting in my office. The real celebration was coming. Morning light filtered through the blinds of my office, a cramped corner of Portland's downtown where numbers once defined my life. Rain tapped the window softer. Now a whisper compared to last night's storm. The anniversary dinner replayed in my mind. Ellen's trembling hand, the powder in my wine, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. I sat at my desk. The envelope from Joe's reports in front of me. Its weight, a promise of justice. I opened it, spreading the contents across the desk, photos of Ellen and Neil, their stolen moments, captured in grainy detail, typed notes on their meetings, Joe's cryptic warning about Neil's dealings. I added my own, a timeline, meticulous each data step in their betrayal. My pen moved with precision, labeling, organizing, building a case as airtight as the ledgers I'd balanced for decades. This wasn't rage, it was calculation. The folder I prepared was thick. Now its page is a weapon. I'd considered confronting them last night, letting the truth spill over the cake and candles, but that was too easy. They'd deny, deflect, turn it on me. No, I needed something undeniable, a moment that would strip them bare. The dinner tomorrow with Neil and his wife Sarah was my chance. Sarah deserved to know too. She'd been as blind as I was. I picked up the phone, dialing her number. "Sarah, it's Frank," I said. When she answered, her voice hesitant, "Can you come to dinner tomorrow at our place? It's important." A pause, then, "Is everything okay?" Her tone was tight, like she sensed something. "Just come," I said, keeping it vague. 7 o'clock. She agreed, and I hung up my fingers, drumming on the desk. Sarah's presence would shift the dynamic. Make Neil squirm. I tucked the folder into the envelope, sealing it with care, and slid it into a locked drawer. The clock on the wall ticked steady, a reminder that time was my ally. I leaned back, the rain's rhythm, syncing with my thoughts. Ellen thought she could outsmart me, slipping powder into my glass, playing the devoted wife. Neil, with his slick charm and shady deals, thought he was untouchable. They'd mocked my quiet life, my steady job, but they'd underestimated me. This folder, this plan, was my answer. The office felt smaller, the air heavy. With purpose, I stood grabbing my coat, the envelope's absence in my hand, a silent vow, tomorrow I'd bring it to the dinner. Let its contents speak when the moment was right. As I locked the door, the clock showed late afternoon, the rain, a faint drizzle. Now I stepped outside my mind, already at the table, picturing their faces when the truth hit. The dining room was a stage. Its long table set with crisp linens and gleaming glasses, the scent of roasted herbs mingling with the damp air from the rain outside. I moved through our Portland home with purpose, arranging plates, pouring wine. Each action a step toward the reckoning. Tonight wasn't just dinner. It was the moment I've been building toward, the envelope in my jacket pocket, a ticking bomb. Ellen, Neil, and Sarah would be here, and I was ready. Ellen entered first, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Her smile as brittle as the autumn leaves scattered outside. "You've outdone yourself, Frank," she said. Her voice too bright, her eyes avoiding mine. I nodded, watching her adjust a napkin, her fingers restless. She didn't know I'd seen the powder last night, didn't know. The folder in my office held her secrets. Neil arrived next, his laugh booming as he shrugged off his coat. "Frank, you old dog, pulling out all the stops," he said, clapping my shoulder. His eyes, though, scanned the room, lingering on Ellen. A beat too long I poured in wine, my face neutral, the envelope's weight grounding me. Sarah followed, her face pale, her greeting quiet. She clutched her purse like a lifeline, her gaze flickering to Neil. Then away, we sat, the clock on the mantel, ticking its rhythm, a pulse. Beneath the small talk, Ellen played hostess. Her laughter forced her hand, brushing Neil's. As she passed the bread, Sarah barely spoke, her fork scraping her plate, her eyes darting between them. I watched it all, my silence deliberate, my wine untouched. The rain outside drummed a steady backdrop to the tension coiling tighter. "To family," Neil said, raising his glass, his grin wide but his voice sharp. "And to Frank for hosting us, family," I repeated, my tone, even my eyes on Ellen. She froze, her glass halfway to her lips, then forced a smile. Sarah's hand tightened on her napkin, her knuckles white. The moment hung heavy, the clocks ticking louder in the pause. Ellen broke it, her voice high. "Frank's always been good at bringing us together, hasn't he?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled back, pouring more wine instead. Neil chuckled, oblivious, but Sarah's eyes met mine, questioning. Afraid. They didn't know what I held, didn't know the folder's contents, photos, reports, proof, waited to unravel them. Dinner stretched, each bite a countdown. I stood to clear a plate, my hand brushing the envelope in my pocket. It was time. I set it on the table, its plain surface drawing every eye. But I didn't open it. "Not yet, dessert." "Soon," I said, my voice calm, my gaze sweeping over them. The clock struck 11, its chime cutting through the silence. Ellen's smile faltered. Neil's jaw tightened and Sarah's breath caught. I sat back. The envelope untouched, my mind. On the moment I choose to strike. The dining room was a pressure cooker, the air thick with unspoken truths and the sharp tang of wine. Rain battered the windows of our Portland home, a relentless rhythm matching the pulse in my temples. Ellen's forced laughter cut through the clink of silverware. Neil's jokes landed flat and Sarah's silence screamed louder than words. I sat at the head of the table, the envelope in my pocket, a burning weight, my calm mask honed. Over weeks of planning. The clock on the mantel ticked each second, a step toward the edge. I stood abrupt, my chair scraping the hardwood. All eyes snapped to me. Ellen's wary, Neil's guarded, Sarah's fearful. My hand moved to the folder of photographs I'd kept hidden, tucked beneath a napkin. I didn't speak, didn't need to. The pictures spilled onto the table. A cascade of betrayal. Ellen and Neil in a cafe, her hand on his outside, a hotel, his arm around her waist in his car, their faces too close. The images landed like blows. Silencing the room, Ellen froze her glass, trembling wine sloshing over the rim. Neil snatched the photo. His jaw tight, his charm crumbling. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. A choked sob escaping. I watched them. My face stone, my heart a furnace, 30 years of marriage, countless favors for my brother, and this was their gratitude. What is this, Frank? Ellen's voice was sharp, but it cracked her eyes, darting to Neil. You're spying on me, spying. I said, my tone low, cutting. I didn't need to. You weren't exactly discreet. I leaned forward, my gaze pinning her. You thought I wouldn't notice. Neil stammered his hands, fumbling the photo. Frank, come on, it's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like. Sarah's voice broke raw, her eyes blazing at Neil. You lied to me, to us. She shoved her chair back, tears streaking her face. Ellen's lips curled, a last grasp at control. This doesn't concern you, Frank, you shouldn't care. Her words were a slap, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse in my head. Replaying her laughter with Neil, her powder in my wine, I reached into my pocket, pulling out the envelope, the same one that had held love. Notes then evidence, now something more. Its weight felt final, a guillotine waiting to fall. I said it before Ellen. My movements deliberate, my eyes never leaving hers. Open it, I said. My voice steady, cold. Her fingers hesitated, hovering her breath shallow. The clock struck midnight, its chime, a tolling bell. Rain roared outside, drowning the silence. Ellen's hand twitched toward the envelope, her eyes wide, with something like fear. Neil's face drained of color. Sarah's sobs grew quieter and I stood, unmoved, my mind on the scream I knew was coming. This was only the beginning of their reckoning. The dining room was a battlefield strewn with shattered illusions and spilled wine. The photographs lay scattered across the table, their glossy surfaces reflecting the candlelight accusations. Rain pounded the windows, a furious roar that matched the chaos unfolding inside our Portland home. Ellen clutched the envelope I placed before her, her fingers trembling, her eyes locked on mine. Neil slumped in his chair, his usual swagger gone, while Sarah's tear-streaked face turned from him in disgust. The clock on the mantel ticked then stilled, as if time itself held its breath. Ellen tore open the envelope, the paper ripping with a sound like a wound. A single document slid out. Its start print a quiet bomb. She scanned it, her breath hitching, and then she screamed. A raw, piercing sound that cut through the storm outside. The paper flooded to the floor and I knew what she'd read, a medical report damning, detailing a condition Neil had known about, one he'd passed to her in their reckless affair. I didn't need to name it. Her panic told the story. You knew. Ellen whirled on Neil, her voice a snarl. You knew and didn't tell me. She lunged, shoving him her nails, raking his arm. Neil flinched his hands, raised his excuses, incoherent. Ellen, I didn't, it's not like that. Sarah stood her chair, toppling her voice, shaking with rage. You monster, she spat at. Neil then turned to me, her eyes pleading. Frank, why didn't you warn me? Her words stung, but I held her gaze unyielding. I warned you tonight, I said, my voice calm. Final, you're free now, Sarah, we both are. Ellen sank to her knees clutching the document. Her sobs ragged. Frank, please, she begged, her voice breaking. We can fix this. I didn't mean you meant every choice. I cut in my tone. Ice, every lie, every betrayal. You and Neil chose this. I stepped back, my shadow falling over the table. You're not my problem anymore. Neil's head dropped, his hands gripping the table's edge, his knuckles white. Frank, I'm your brother, he mumbled a desperate plea. We're family. Family doesn't do this, I said, turning away. The photographs crunched under my shoe. A fitting end to their charade. Sarah fled the room, her footsteps echoing, and I followed, leaving Ellen's wails and Neil's silence behind. Outside, the rain soaked my coat cold and cleansing. The stopped clock stayed in my mind a symbol of the life I was leaving. I walked to my car, the street lights blurring in the downpour, my thoughts on the freedom waiting beyond this night. Ellen's scream still rang in my ears, but it wasn't my burden. I was done carrying their lies. The ocean stretched before my new apartment. Its waves, a steady pulse under a sky free of Portland's endless rain. I stood in the living room, boxes half unpacked, the scent of salt air mingling with fresh paint. 6 months had passed since that night in the dining room, since Ellen's scream and Neil's collapse under the weight of their own deceit. The divorce papers, signed in a lawyer's office with a hand steadier than I'd expected, were a quiet victory, a line drawn between who I was and who I'd become. I lifted a box, pulling out an old clock, the same one that had stopped during the confrontation. I wounded its tick, filling the room a sound of renewal. The apartment was small, perched on the Oregon coast, a far cry from the sprawling house I'd built for Ellen, but it was mine. Every corner, free of her shadow, her lies. I set the clock on a shelf, its hands moving forward. Like me, the past lingered, but only in fragments. I'd given up dreams for Ellen trips abroad, a boat I'd sketched in my mind while she'd sneered at my small life. Neil, with his slick charm and shadier secrets, had mocked me too, until the truth in that envelope stripped him bare. I didn't know where they were. Now, didn't care. Their ruin was their own making and I'd walked away clean. I stepped onto the balcony. The ocean's roar. A psalm of possibility, a notebook lay on the table filled with plans, a trip to Italy, a photography course, a life I delayed too long. I'd spent decades balancing books, balancing others' needs, but now the ledger was mine, the envelope. Once a vessel for love, then evidence was gone. Burned in a fire pit weeks ago, its ashes scattered like my old life. The sun dipped low, painting the waves gold. I thought of Sarah hoping she'd found her own peace. I thought of the dining room, the photographs, the moment I reclaimed my dignity. Justice wasn't loud. It was this, standing here free, the clock ticked inside steady and I smiled my fingers, tracing a postcard from Florence I'd pinned to the wall. I'd be there soon, the first of many journeys. The ocean whispered endless alive. I leaned on the railing, my shoulders relaxed, my mind clear. The future was open, a horizon. I chart myself. I turned back inside the clock's rhythm, a quiet promise. My thoughts already on the road ahead where no one could betray me again. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.